News reporting on day one of the extradition hearing of Julian Assange at Old Bailey in London. It was a dramatic day indeed, and the major theme was that the United States showed its hand by changing its strategy away from charges of espionage and focusing exclusively on the new superseding indictment that they put down in June that focuses on the charge of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. Uh, Pursuing the espionage angle is probably not the best strategy for the US. And that was evident in the very first day back in February when this hearing began, when James Lewis, the British Queen's counselor for the United States government, turned to the reporters assembled in the courtroom and said that this hearing and this process was not about them. But by just raising that, it became an issue. And the United States has seen that even big corporate media, like the New York Times and CNN and others, The Guardian, have turned against this aspect of the case to prosecute a publisher and a journalist for publishing secret material. This is something that mainstream media does all the time, and this would put them in the crosshairs. So the U.S. has backed away on that, and they put forward this superseding indictment. Back in June, it was only delivered to the court in July and to the defense at the end of July. And this includes new evidence, but no new charges. And the new evidence is based mostly on what two FBI informants gave the U.S. back in 2010 in Iceland. And it's essentially they're trying to build a case that Assange was encouraging others to hack. And there was also in that indictment, this superseding indictment, evidence that Assange helped Edward Snowden escape from Hong Kong when he was wanted from the United States, Snowden being, of course, the NSA whistleblower. But it's interesting to note that Assange has never been charged with trying to help a fugitive evade justice. Even Mark Summers, the QC for the defense, pointed out that this was an absurdity to raise this because it's not a criminal act. At least it was not a charge in the indictment. Assange is a man who was standing in the dock in the glass cage in Old Bailey. And in fact, because of this new superseding indictment, there was also a new extradition request that was made by the United States that was accepted by the British government. And that meant that Assange was no longer, for a few seconds anyway, under arrest under the old extradition request. So he had to go through the spectacle of being rearrested in the court. That happened when the courtroom was put into session earlier today. The Assange, because of this shift in defense, of the prosecution's argument to move towards this superseding indictment, and apparently to push away from the espionage charges, the defense made a gambit inside the courtroom today to get Vanessa Barreza, the judge presiding over this extradition hearing, to dismiss the new evidence of this superseding indictment on the grounds that the defense team did not have enough time to prepare for it. Now, Barreza asked a few questions of the defense, including how many times they'd had gotten a chance to speak to their client, Julian Assange. And it was virtually no chance in the last couple of months. Only Mark Summers, the lawyer for Assange, said that they only spoke twice on the phone with him in these last weeks, and that both times there was a bad connection, they could hardly hear him. Barreza decided then to put a 10-minute pause and go back to her chambers, presumably to speak to Lady Arbuthnot, who is the chief magistrate from whom she gets the instructions. And after a longer than 10-minute delay, Barreza returned to the court to announce that she had denied this request to postpone or adjourn the hearing until January in order for the defense to speak to Assange, who they said was the most knowledgeable person and who had not seen the new indictment until very recently. She denied that and said that on two grounds. One, that because they had tried to get this evidence thrown out and were defeated by her decision, that it was wrong of them to then now try to delay until January. And secondly, the point she made was that the prosecution the defense had been given a chance by her to delay this hearing until November, and they did not take that opportunity. And I've rarely agreed with anything that Judge Barreza has said, but you have to admit that that was a point there. The defense for Assange could have asked for this delay. They did not. They showed up in the courtroom. They couldn't get the evidence thrown out. So then in the court, as the hearing began, asked for this delay till January. Now one must consider an enormous dilemma that the lawyers have, because their client, Julian Assange, is in peril. We've known this for a long time. His health was bad even in the Ecuador embassy. He's now been more than 1 year, mostly in isolation at Belmarsh prison, in the midst of a global pandemic that has ravaged a lot of prisons around the world. They did not want to keep him in that dangerous situation any longer. But on the other hand, they've decided that they did need until January to build this defense against this new evidence, not new charges. But she denied that. So the court moved on to the first witness of the day, Professor Mark Feldstein, a professor of broadcast journalism. There were technical problems. He couldn't be heard right away, and then he was brought on. And Feldstein's testimony was quite anticlimactic because it was about the Espionage Act, and it was questions about had a publisher ever been charged under the Espionage Act for publishing before. And of course, the answer was no. Was under questioning from Summers, was it a daily occurrence for media to publish classified material? Yes, he said. And they were never charged before. And a president had never gotten a grand jury to return an indictment against a publisher for publishing anything, classified material or otherwise. But then his sound cut out again, ending this first very dramatic day in which we nearly had an adjournment until January, when an attempt was made to get some evidence thrown out. And of course, the Assange team lost. They lost, giving the impression that the decision has been made in this case already, and that we're going through the motions here. We will be back tomorrow night as the Professor Feldstein's testimony will continue, since it was cut off because of technical problems. And that presumably he will be back on the stand, a virtual stand, because of the pandemic. He's, of course, testifying online through video. Our own attempts to get online today to view the proceedings failed. We have been granted, we were happy about that, a ticket to see the proceedings by video link. When we tried to get on, we were not allowed. We do not know why. We're not speculating about that. We don't want anyone to speculate about that. But we're going to be back tomorrow, and hopefully, I think this time we're going to get in to watch the proceedings. But I wanted to thank three people in particular: Mary Kostakidis, former Australian news presenter; Kevin Gostola, who is the managing editor of Shadowproof; and Juan Passarelli, filmmaker and videographer who has been close to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for at least a decade now. We relied on their tweets and documents that were sent. So to put together our live updates on Consortium News that you can be following, and to put together this video report. And tomorrow we're going to be speaking to you again at the same time, which is noon Eastern time, 5 in Britain, and to talk to you about day 2 of what is supposed to be a 3 to 4 week proceeding, at the end of which the decision will be made by Vanessa Barreza about whether to send Julian Assange to the United States, where the US might very well then revive the espionage charges. They do not need to convict him or prove him guilty of anything in this proceeding. They simply need to build a case that he should be extradited on a crime that's also a crime in the United Kingdom. These new evidence are not about charges that are new, simply related to the computer intrusion conspiracy charge, which in fact the Assange lawyers pretty much demolished back in February, in the first week of this case that's been interrupted by the pandemic, when they said that Assange was actually trying to help Chelsea Manning to download video and music games that are denied legally to active service members of the United States, not to try to get secret documents from a government computer when the indictment itself says very clearly that Chelsea Manning had legal access to all of that. So I'm sure that that part of the U.S. Prosecution strategy will come out again as well. They're shying away, it seems, in this part of this process, the extradition process, from the espionage charges and focusing on the computer intrusion and what happened back in Iceland in 2010, which was a very shady situation with 2 FBI informants in trying to build a case against Julian Assange. So we'll see you here, same time, same place, noon Eastern time, for day 2 of the extradition hearing of Julian Assange. I'm Joe Lauria reporting for Consortium News.